just been studying through the letter to Romans, and so I would like to go into an Old Testament book and give that some consideration together. And I thought in the weeks that are leading up to the end of the year, what better thing to consider, and as we launch into the new year, then, what are we doing with our lives? What is the purpose of life? What is the significance of life? How can I live my life in the most meaningful way? How can I put the most into life and get the most out of the life that God has given me? And there's a whole book of the Old Testament given to that subject, and that's what I want to look at, or start to look at this morning. What is the significance and meaning of life? What makes you get out of the bed in the morning? And there's two ways that can go, right? If you can't answer that question rightly, either you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, or you get out of bed and you're all excited and busy and active with a whole lot of things, but at some point you realize that all that busyness is meaningless. It's pointless. It's futile. And you feel discouraged, and you feel like someone has ripped the rug out from you because you've been heading down a street that actually is a dead end. And now what? Well, how does the world answer this question? What does the world have to say? Yes, some things that different people had to say. It doesn't really matter who it is. Life is without meaning. You bring the meaning to it. The meaning of life is whatever you ascribe it to be. Being alive is the meaning. For the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. I think essentially the meaning of life is probably the journey, and not really any one thing or an outcome or a result. I think it's kind of the process. And I think that if you can find happiness in the process, then maybe that's it. We can think so much about life and take ourselves so seriously. I mean, I like to tell people, don't take life too seriously, because you'll cloud the experience. That's what the meaning of life is to me, being able to enjoy the moment. The meaning of life is not simply to exist, to survive, but to move ahead, to go up, to achieve, to conquer. You will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. The sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. You can see how many different ideas there are. Some are profound, some are just silly. The real question is, do any of these people have any authority to speak on the subject of what is the meaning of life? Did they create life? Do they understand what life is all about? Did they design life? These people, if they're saying these things and they haven't even reached the end of their life, they haven't even got to the finish line, can they really speak with authority about what life's all about and how to live it to the fullest? They're not looking back from 1,000 years from now and giving us insight and saying this is actually what makes life meaningful. So the only person who's truly qualified to talk with authority on what is the meaning and significance of life, how can I put the most into life and get the most out of life, is God, the author of life, the creator, the owner. And he's inspired an entire book to answer that question, the book of Ecclesiastes. Hopefully you've heard of it. It's in the Old Testament. That's the next book that I want to study through, so you can open up your Bibles to Ecclesiastes. It's after Proverbs. And before Song of Solomon. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. This morning is a bit of an introduction, and we'll cover chapter 1 and just the overview of the book. So I want to look at the author, the conclusion, the argument, and the evidence. I'm giving you an introduction to this letter and this topic. So firstly, the author, and the summary of this is, this author is an expert on the subject. So Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1 says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. The words of the preacher, the Hebrew word there is literally koheleth, and it means the one who has gathered. the one who's gathered his students or his subjects around him in order to teach them or instruct them or impart wisdom to them. In other words, the picture here is of an old man, a sage, gathering his students, gathering the young men and women together and saying, now listen to me. I want to teach you something about what I've learned about the meaning and significance of life. I want to tell you about what I've discovered. I want to tell you about my meanderings and my mistakes. I want to tell you what I've learned from doing things right and doing things wrong, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes, and so that you can make the most of your life as you're setting out to live it. It's like granddad gathering the grandchildren together and saying, now listen, let me tell you a few things. You've lived 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. I want to tell you now, as I'm reaching the end of my years, how you can live your life well. So this is wisdom literature. And one of the principles we learn in Dig and Discover as we learn to dig into God's Word is to always consider the genre. That's the genre. It's the kind of literature that we're looking at. God couches His truth in different kinds of literature, and this is wisdom literature. It's full of proverbs. It's full of poetry. It's designed to help us to think, to cause us to think, to move us to think soberly about the realities of life. In other words, wisdom literature takes the truths of God and it brings them down to earth, and it makes them practical. And it causes us to think, how does the reality of who God is and the truths that He has given, how does that play out in the very earthy, practical realities of daily life? So this is exactly the kind of genre you would expect God to couch a subject like this in. What is the meaning and significance of life? And it's important that we realize how you respond to wisdom literature, how we dig into and get the most out of wisdom literature. It's not fast food. It's not McDonald's. You don't rush in, get a meal for 30 minutes, and then rush out. Wisdom literature should make you want to just stop and think about what you're learning. Think about, how does this relate to my life? What is really going on? Be still. And so I encourage you, as we work through, the next few weeks into the new year, and hopefully things slow down just a little bit over December, and I thought that's why it's such a great time to look at this book. Take some time out to think, to ponder, to talk about these things with your spouse or with a good friend. Make it a topic of discussion. Let it go deeper than just a superficial, I got that. Wisdom literature doesn't work that way. We've got to think, we've got to allow it to settle down into the deep parts of our hearts so that it can begin to have an effect on us. So what are Solomon's credentials here? It says the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. So he's the son of David, he's the king of Jerusalem. And I think the author is Solomon. If you look down at verse 12, I, the preacher, being king over Israel, he gives his credentials as he opens up this subject. Why is he qualified to speak on this subject? And I've applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, by wisdom, all that is done under heaven. So I've applied myself fully to this topic to search out wisdom, to try and gain an understanding is what is life all about. And not only that, it's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of mankind. He's not only applied his heart, but he's gathered. We know from 1 Kings 4 that Solomon wrote over 3,000 proverbs. And we know that he also did careful inquiry into the wisest men, the wisest sayings, the greatest truths in the empire. And he gathered them together. And we have a record of some of that in the book of Proverbs. And so he's really done careful inquiry into this. And not only that, but this is Solomon, right? In 1 Kings 3, God appears to Solomon. And he says, I'll give you anything you want. And Solomon says, I want only one thing, wisdom to rule your people well. And this is what God says in response to him in 1 Kings 3, verse 12. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall rise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no king shall compare with you all your days. The book of Kings goes on to document Solomon's great wisdom and his great wealth. And in 1 Kings 10, the fame of him is spreading so far that the Queen of Sheba comes to journey just to hear Solomon's wisdom and to see it in action. And she tests him with various questions. And then in 1 Kings 10, this is her conclusion, verse 3. And Solomon answered all her questions, and there was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I didn't believe the reports until I came, and my own eyes have seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpassed the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. He has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness. In the next chapter of Kings, however, we learn that Solomon loved foreign women. And we know the account in 1 Kings 11:4. When Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. He built temples to these foreign women where idols were worshipped there, gods of the nations, and sacrifices were made to them. The wisest man who has ever lived, the man who was given supernatural wisdom from God, became the greatest fool who's ever lived. He went from the greatest heights to the greatest depths. But is that the end of Solomon's story? Well, 1 Kings tells us, 1 Kings 11 says that God pursued Solomon, and he sent trials and difficulties, and he disciplined him. And he called him to repentance, and he appeared to him on more than one occasion and said, Solomon, the pathway you're going down leads to death. Because Solomon had a name before he was called Solomon. He was called Jedediah, the one whom God loves. And God made a promise to David, I will never take my love from you or your son. Surely God, in his pursuit of Solomon, in his sinful rebellion and folly and wandering, surely these means of grace that God applied to his life was effective. And I think we have the fruit of that in Ecclesiastes. What we have in Ecclesiastes is Solomon not only speaking from his wisdom, but speaking in hindsight as he looks back on his folly. Verse 14 of chapter 1, I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and is striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after the wind. Solomon tests both sides of the coin. He tested everything. I've done it all. I've tried it all. He gave himself fully not only to inquire into wisdom, but he also gave himself fully there in verse 17. He applied his heart fully to know wisdom and folly and madness. And he looks back and he says, this is what I've learned. We see something of this experiment as we look into chapter 2. Look at chapter 2 and verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. He gave himself over to both wisdom and folly. And here's Solomon giving the conclusion. He gave himself over. He did this experiment in both godliness and godlessness, both religion and irreligion, both self-denial and self-indulgence. And he found it all empty. And now he gives us his conclusion. Let me tell you what I've learned. He gathers as the wise sage, the young, the youth. No one else, he knows, no one else has the kind of resources that he had, the kind of wealth, the kind of opportunities, the kind of power that he had to pursue meaning both in wisdom and in folly. And this is what he says. Chapter 1. It's all vanity. Something else to say about this author, though. If you notice there, he says in chapter 12, let's go to chapter 12 for a second. The end of the book, or near the end of the book. Chapter 12, verse 9. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. Yeah, again, he's ending the book by giving all his credentials. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. And yeah, he reminds us something. Not only did he pursue wisdom himself, not only did he collect all the wisdom that he could find, but he reminds us that all the words of the wise there in verse 11 are like goads. They're like nails firmly fixed. They're immovable because they come from the one shepherd. They ultimately come from the shepherd. And yeah, he reminds us this pursuit that he had wasn't just on his own. What we have in Ecclesiastes is inspired scripture. We have the words of God. We don't just have the words of man. We don't just have the experiences of man. We have God-inspired words. Can the sheep find the meaning of life? Can the sheep find their way? Do not the sheep need the shepherd to point the way? And yeah, he reminds, no, listen, true wisdom comes and begins with the fear of God, and true wisdom comes from God. God gives it. And this is what he's giving to us. So both humanly speaking, this man can speak with authority. But he's speaking more than just as a man. He's speaking as an inspired author of Scripture. He's speaking from God, the words of the great shepherd, about the meaning of life. So that's the author. Both by human wisdom and experience and ability and divine inspiration, he is an expert on this subject. Second, the conclusion. Let's see what he says at the end of Ecclesiastes. Because we've seen the beginning. Actually, sorry, let me go to the beginning first, and then we'll look at the end, and we'll contrast the beginning and the end. You know, that's another dig and discover practice that we've learned. Compare the beginning and the end. He says there in verse 2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What do you think the key word is there? 5 times repeated in verse 2. It's a key phrase that the book turns around, vanity. It introduces us to the major theme of the book. What is the purpose? The word is used a number of times in the Old Testament. It's variously translated like this: vain, foolish, empty, futile, a mere breath, a vapor, an enigma, fleeting, worthless, useless. I called this message Bubbles. Bubbles. That's, I think, a good summary. The author's done this experiment. What is life all about? What is it really about? And it's like he's been reaching out for something that has a substance, something that has weight, something that has significance, something that he could lay hold of and say, this is what it's about. But as he's tried to do that, he just finds everything is bubbles. You try and lay hold of it, and it just leaves you empty. That's what he's saying, bubbles. There's a play on words here. Everything becomes nothing. That's how he concludes there in verse 2. All is vanity. In the Hebrew, hakol habol. Can you hear the play on words? Hakol habol. Everything becomes nothing. Everything proves to be nothing. You think you've gained everything, but then you just find out you've actually gained nothing. Do those words sound familiar to you? Jesus said, What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? That's kind of what God is saying here. The outlook's not supposed to be pessimistic. It's saying, what is the profit? What is the gain? What is the lasting benefit to life if you leave God out? It's not saying what is the profit in an absolute ultimate sense. It's saying what is the profit and the gain and the meaning and the significance and the fullness if you leave God out. He hints at it there in verse 3. What does man gain by all the toil, everything that he's busy with, at which he toils under the sun? Under the sun. That's the sort of provision there, and he's going to build on that. But he's saying, if you just consider under the sun and you leave God out and you just say, what are we busy with here, without reference to God, then what does it all amount to? And his conclusion, bubbles. Let's go and have a look at the conclusion. Comparing the beginning at the end to the end, Solomon 12, Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13. I'm renaming the book of the Bible. Verse 13, the end of the matter, after all has been heard, after he's made his whole argument, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So what does he conclude? After everything is said and done, fear God. Put God central in your life. Serve God. Keep his commandments. Do God's purpose, because why? God is the ultimate and only judge. That's what he says. God will bring every deed into judgment. Who is the one who judges any deed or any activity and finds it to be worthwhile or worthless? Not man, but God. God is the one who makes an evaluation as to whether a life has been well lived, whether something is significant and right and good and lasting and enduring. Man doesn't make that judgment. That's his conclusion. Leave God out of the frame of reference. Leave God out of what you're doing, and what you have, doesn't matter what you call it, it's bubbles. You're grasping at something that is nothing. Everything becomes nothing without God. And with God, everything becomes significant. So stop for a moment and just think about your life. It's good for us just to stop for a moment. Think about your days. Think about your activities. Think about your relationships. Think about your goals, your aspirations. Think about your words and your speech. Are they Godward? Are they God-saturated? How much of your day can you get through without God invading your thoughts, your words, your relationships, your purposes, your tasks? How much can you get through a day without God? To seize the day means to lay hold of God in every moment of that day. Every activity, every thought, every word, everything that we involve ourselves with, that we don't see the connection to God, becomes bubbles. Everything becomes nothing. Every moment, every experience, every act, every relationship, every pleasure finds its significance only in relation to God. Therefore, we need to bring God into all those aspects of our life. Everything without God is vanity. Everything becomes nothing when you leave God out. That's the conclusion. Now, how's he going to get there? We've seen where he starts, all is vanity, but he doesn't mean in an absolute sense. All is vanity without God. Therefore, we need to embrace everything in life with God, in God, for God. How does he build his argument? So thirdly, the argument. There's 4 sections to the book. And in each section, he starts to build a part of the argument, and then he summarizes with the same kind of conclusion in very similar words. So the first section goes through to the end of chapter 2. And then he's got this conclusion in chapter 2 and verse 24. Ecclesiastes 2:24. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in all his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the busyness of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is a vanity and striving after the wind. The English translation doesn't put it well here. There's nothing better for a person than he should eat and drink. What the text is really saying is there's no good in a man. There's no good in a man that he should eat or drink or find enjoyment in his toil. In other words, man can't look within man. Man can't find in man the ability, the capacity to assign meaning and significance, to find joy and lasting significance in what he's doing. Because that is not found within man. It comes as a gift from God. That's why he's saying, this is by God's design, right? This comes from the hand of God there at the end of verse 24. Apart from God, who can eat or who can have enjoyment, right? The one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. In other words, in right relationship with God, there is found wisdom and knowledge and joy and meaning and significance and fullness. And the one who lives without God, God has assigned the meaninglessness, the busyness of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who does please God. Meaning and significance and satisfaction is not found in man. It's assigned by God and given as a gift from God. That's the first part of his argument. Section 2 then begins at chapter 3 and goes all the way to chapter 5, and then he also has got the same kind of conclusion. You can see chapter 3 starts with this laying out this comprehensive plan that God has. Chapter 3 verse 1, for everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up. And what he begins to show us is that in God's world, there is a place assigned for everything, a meaning assigned to everything, a time for everything. God has this comprehensive plan and purpose that he is working out, that he has assigned, and everything and everyone has their place and their time in God's plan. The problem is we can't figure it out. We don't have God's mind, God's understanding, God's perspective. There's too many anomalies. There's too many things we can't figure out. There's too many pieces of the puzzle that we don't know how it fits together. So significance doesn't come from me being able to see how everything fits together. That's for God to see. Significance doesn't come from me being able to assemble this whole puzzle and look at the beauty of it. That's not where significance is found, because we are not God and we don't know how that all works. Significance is found in me building the puzzle with God, in me fitting the pieces together that I do understand and I do see fit together. That's his argument through this next section. And he concludes in chapter 5, verse 18, behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Do you see what he's getting at? We have a lot. We have an assignment. We have a place. And we need to find joy in taking up our place and building what God has given us to build. In enjoying what God has given us to enjoy. In doing what he's assigned us to do, even though we can't always see how this all fits into the great plan and scheme of things. Meaning doesn't come from that. Meaning comes from trusting that God understands the great place that this fits in. the significance of what He's assigned me to do in the great scheme of things. Isn't that true? I mean, we want to make a lasting impact on someone. And sometimes you hear someone say, that really impacted me. And you go, what? It was something that you didn't even realize was significant. You felt you were doing nothing. And yet God was using it in a very significant way. The third section gets to the heart of the book, goes all the way through to chapter 8. And again, there's this conclusion. How do we live with all these anomalies? How do we live with all these unknowns? How do we live meaningfully and fully, even though we can't see how all the puzzle pieces fit together? How do we not let that frustrate us? There seems to always be things that are acting against us getting the most out of life. We don't seem to be able to enjoy even the good things in life, right? Like even the little we enjoy doesn't seem lasting. It doesn't seem to satisfy. And then there's evil and oppression and injustice all around that's continually acting against us, progressing and advancing and finding fulfillment. And this evil is endemic and it's lurking. And even in the good times, we know the hard times are just around the corner. And then, of course, there's the reality of death. Right? If it wasn't bad enough, we're all going to die. And we don't know when, but we know it's going to happen. And it's going to all come upon us very abruptly. How do I live life to the full in the face of all this uncertainty, all this evil and injustice, and in the face of death itself? Well, he gives us some insight in this section. In 8:15, he again gives us this conclusion. I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. There is joy in the moment. There is joy in building the puzzle pieces with God. There's joy in the present. There's fullness. And so he's moving from just accepting that God understands it all, God knows it all, resigning myself to I have a place even though I don't know what it is, to pursuing actively and vigorously joy and fullness in the moments that God has given me, in the tasks that he's assigned to me. And then the last section reaches to that conclusion where he builds and says, well, how do we do that practically? How do we get that right? How do we find joy? If he's commending joy, how do we experience it then on a daily basis in the light of all those realities? So the last few minutes that remain, I just want to go back and look at chapter 1, those 7 verses that I haven't covered. And just consider the evidence that he summons. Because we're not going to pursue his conclusion. We're not going to be excited and embrace the solution unless we've felt the weight of the problem. If we are finding meaning and significance in what we're doing, then why do we search beyond what we're doing? If we think everything's fine and hunky-dory, then why will we look for a different perspective, a divine perspective to help us make sense? And so we need to sense the weight of the problem as he opens up in this prologue and helps us to see the problem and why we need to journey with him towards the solution that he finds. So chapter 1, verse 3, what does man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? What does it all amount to? What impact do we really have from all this frenzied activity that we're busy with? Verse 4, a generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. People come and go, right? Our lives are so fleeting. Not just do we come and go, we're born and we die. Generations come and go, and it's when compared to the earth, when you just step back, you say, what impact did we really have? That's what he's pointing. He's just saying, look how small we are. Look how fleeting are our lives. Whole generations go. Think about it. What do you know? What person or people has left a lasting impact just 100 years from when they died? Think of people that lived 100 years ago. What lasting impact are they having? What significance was their life? Who even remembers their life? Think about, we got the World Cup soccer coming. Who remembers who were the significant players in the last World Cup? Just one World Cup ago. They were living for that. The glory of scoring a goal. We can't even recall who played. One World Cup later. That's what he's getting at. Verse 5 to 7. The sun rises, the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuit the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. And what's he saying? This is cycles of life. When you just step back, you just go, the sun rose, the sun set, tomorrow it'll rise again, it'll set again, and I don't change any of that. What significance am I really having? There seems like this endless cycle. There's many philosophies in life that get stuck on that, right? You know, the cycles of life. Life is just an endless cycle of reincarnation. History just repeats itself. We're just going around in circles. If we step back and we leave God out of the picture and we say, what is the meaning of it? Life just seems to go on with or without us. You can sense the hopelessness, the smallness that your lives take on the moment you step back and consider the bigger picture. Verse 8. All things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Even if you take it down to our own experience, we so much want satisfaction, we want pleasure, we want to find significance in something that we have or do or accomplish or enjoy. And how long does that last? You know, we like really pursuing this car that we desperately want, and then we have it, only to find we want to pursue that car, or that house, or that accomplishment, or that holiday. We're so looking forward to the weekend or this weekend away, only to find that it doesn't last, right? Our eyes, our appetite, our tasting it's never enough. No matter how much we get, it's never enough. Lasting satisfaction is an enigma. It's a bubble. 9. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, this is new? It's already been in the ages before. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. He's saying there's nothing new. Just step back for a moment and say, what is really new? Leave God out of the picture, and where's humanity really going? In circles. We're just getting back to where we started again. Leave God out of the picture, and history has no divine purpose and end goal. We're getting nowhere. What we think is new is really just already been in a new form. Fashions just repeat themselves. Ideas just repeat themselves. Philosophies, there's nothing new. No one comes up with anything new. In fact, he even looks into the future and says, in the future, they're not even going to call that new. They'll be looking back, and not only that, but we've got Alzheimer's. We can't even remember, and so we forget that it's not new. We don't even remember we've been here before, we've done this before, we've learned this before, we've heard this before. We sort of experience it as a bit new because of our lack of remembering, but it's not really new. When you put man at the center of the search for significance, and you try and find fullness with man at the center, what you're grasping at is bubbles. Bubbles. Permanence. People come and go, generations come and go, there's no lasting impact. Pleasure. Nothing seems to satisfy for very long. Purpose. You leave God out, humanity is not going anywhere. There's no destination, there's no point, there's no beginning and no end.